Minutes past 1. Thank you. So a pleasant good afternoon to everyone and a special welcome to our Jamaican attendees to this Lockjack JSB webinar. I am Ron Sukram, Academic Director of the Business School, and I'll be the moderator of today's session. I am pleased to introduce today's presenter, Dr. Balraj Kistow, who is a senior member of faculty as well as consultant here at the Business School. He also serves as a program director for our financial management program, Masters in Financial Management. And Dr. Kistow's current research focus are areas which includes competitiveness and productivity, family business, artificial intelligence, sustainability, and culture in international business. Balraj will present on the topic today, leveraging artificial intelligence to boost productivity, efficiency, and competitiveness to Jamaican context. Your questions or comments for Dr. Kistow can be posted on the chat or the question and answer option on Zoom or in the comment section on Facebook if you're streaming live from that platform. And these questions will be considered after Dr. Kistow's presentation. Dr. Kistow, I now invite you to make your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. And just give me a second. Let me share my screen with you. So I see that I'm sharing. Can you all see my screen? Just to confirm.
Yes. And
Yes.
you can put it in presentation mode, please.
So good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for being here as we get set to interrogate this all important area for regional progress, leveraging artificial intelligence and boosting productivity, efficiency, and competitiveness. Today, we're going to look at it from the context of Jamaica. But by and large, what we are going to be sharing, what we're going to be looking at, would apply to the larger Caribbean region. So while our focus would be on Jamaica, it is not far-fetched from, and you would see that what we would be speaking about could fit into any of our Caribbean countries. Now, when you look at it, productivity and efficiency is what would lead to us creating a competitive environment. So what we're going to focus on today is looking to see how can we use artificial intelligence to take us to that place. But I want to start by placing this whole area within the context of the era that we are in. And that era we refer to as the fourth industrial revolution. And we see that as what we call the cyber physical era, the coming together of the cyber world and the physical world. The term was coined in 2016 by Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum. And to put that in context with our, why we call it the fourth industrial revolution, if we start from the first industrial revolution, which was in the 17th century, 17th, 18th century, which was based on the mechanization and steam and water power and so on, then we move to the 19th century, where we have the second revolution based on mass production and electricity. And there we had the line process. For instance, Henry Ford production line and so on came into being around that time with the advent of electricity. The third industrial revolution, which was in the 20th century, was based on digitization, electronic and IT systems automation, which ended around 1970 into the 80s. And now we are saying that we are in the fourth industrial revolution, which is the cyber physical era. And there are some important facets to that. So for instance, we see in here that it would lead to fundamental changes. And so you could identify with some of this, that we are now seeing the merging of the physical, the digital, and the biological world to help create a new sort of environment in which we operate. The implication for that is that organizations and countries as a whole would need to rethink how we create, exchange, and deliver value to people. And so that would have some implications for us. And the reason for that is that unlike the last three industrial revolutions, which you see here was more of a linear pattern, right? The fourth industrial revolution is exemplified by disruption and innovation. When we speak of disruption, we are saying that the newness of the technology and the impact on the market would mean that it would disrupt what and how we do things in this new environment. So it is a game changer in that sense, right? So coupled with that, we are not only looking at a digital revolution or a cyber physical system and changes in respect to that alone, but we are also seeing that there is a social revolution. There's an economic revolution. We are seeing that there is a climate revolution. So we have a number of moving parts that we are dealing with at the same time. And so we are merging, and we got to take that into consideration, that fourth industrial revolution and AI, all of these things are happening at the same time, and they are not independent of each other. So it's a lot of changes that's happening, and it is happening at a very fast pace. So AI, as you would see here, when we speak about it in this context, it is happening as we speak. I'm sure you are well aware of what is happening in terms of things like ChatGPT and so on and so on. But in the context, we are saying that AI is but one element, albeit an important element within the fourth industrial revolution, and it would have a serious impact. Now, we see there are a number of different items or areas that we can speak about. AI would fit into that because they are not independent of each other. So for instance, AI would have a bearing on things like cybersecurity, on bioinformatics, neurotechnology, and so on. So while they are seen as separate areas, they are interconnected to each other. So it is within this context today that we are speaking of artificial intelligence or AI. So let's see, what is AI? When we speak of AI, what are we referring to? So by definition, and there are a number of different definitions, but by and large, when we speak of AI or artificial intelligence, we are referring to the simulation of human intelligence in machines. So that's why when you hear AI, the other term that would go together with that is machine learning, right? So here it is, what we are doing here is using machines and programming these machines to think like humans or to mimic human action. So when you say the term also apply to any machine that exhibit traits associated with the human mind, such as learning and problem solving. I'm sure you would have heard of and are familiar with ChatGPT. And the whole G comes from the era in which we are now in AI. It's what we call the generative era. Generative means that it will take what it have and create new knowledge. Bard is supposed to be similar to ChatGPT, but it is from Google. Google is presently working on that. When you look at the timeline, we can see that this started, in 1947. The first major conference was in 1956, And John McKay at that time out of Dartmouth and MIT and Stanford coined the term artificial intelligence in 1956. And you'll see, it has been a long road there. During the 1980s, we had what we call the AI winter, where there was less work being done in the area. But today we see it happening at breakneck speed. We are seeing a whole lot of application, and that is where it becomes different here. That's where the disruption is happening, because the AI is now being applied. It's no longer we are just speaking of this happening in a lab or in a test case. We are now seeing AI being applied in real sense and disrupting markets and making a difference. Now, let us pause for a minute here in terms of the AI side of it, and let's look at the context in the countryside, the Jamaica side. So in October 2023, the World Bank in its report on Jamaica mentioned some of these areas of issues, right? So they said Jamaica has been expanding at a rate of roughly 2.9% in 2023, which is an increase from the past year. Bearing in mind, Jamaica was coming out of IMF program and so on. We see their growth driven largely by tourism and mining. It's a decline in agriculture. So much of Jamaica's economy is based on tourism and mining. That is important because it says where we are in the context of our productive space and the level of production. Again, we see also that there's a deficit in GDP, and much of not the GDP, but the current account, your BOP, but it's 8% of GOP, and that's largely been driven, not the deficit, but where they get money from in the current account is tourism and remittances, right? So remittances account for 22% of intake in Jamaica. That's 22% of their GDP. Like other Caribbean countries, we see worsening crime, social unrest, and so on, and are vulnerable to global downturn. Bearing in mind that we in the Caribbean are dependent on primary industries, tourism, mining, oil, gas, and so on, we are very vulnerable to what is happening in the global environment, climate change, and a rising cost of borrowing. Now, that report also gave us some further insight into the overall context of Jamaica. And what are some of the troubling areas that we see here? So it says that Jamaica is one of the slowest growing economies in Latin America and the Caribbean, and it attributes that to its concentration as low productivity services, right? So that's agriculture, tourism, mining, and so on. Moreover, we see limited technology adoption and innovation, a high connectivity cost, which would lead to what we call the digital divide, a weak business environment, and pervasive crime. Now, that could be any other Caribbean country also, not in every respect, but by and large. And at the same time, we are seeing that we are vulnerable to external shocks and so on that could, basically what they are saying is that there's little margin for error, that if there's external shocks, let's say a global recession or God forbid another event like COVID and so on, it would lead to undermining of the effort for economic growth and poverty reduction and so on. So this is the context that we are speaking about. And so to put that in perspective, where should we be? Here it is, we are dealing with a world that is in the era of the fourth industrial revolution, where we are dealing with things like big data and analytics, augmented reality, which was sort of old now. We are now seeing the whole issue of cybersecurity within this space. So we are operating at a level where we need to be able to deal with these issues, have the capacity to build on this, because that is where the value added is taking place at the global level. But where we are seeing that we are still in an era of concentrated production, a slow growth, a low productivity, crime and social issues, unlimited IT penetration. And again, while we are focused on Jamaica, it's just one test case, and this could apply to any other country in the region. Therefore, we need something to take us forward. And it is here that we are saying that AI and the application of AI could help us in that regard. And how do we leverage it? So I put it in two different areas here. One, we see it in the offensive. So using a sport and an analogy, we can leverage AI in an offensive way, where we take opportunities for productivity gains, use it as a tool for gaining and maintaining competitive advantage. But at the same time, we also need it for as a defense to guard against cyber attacks, and ensuring that we have the human skills and the capacity to compete within the 21st century. Because if that is the reality within which we must do business, it therefore means that we must have the skill set, the infrastructure, and so on to be able to plug into that and do business at that level. So I'm going to start with the defensive first, just one slide on that, and that area we're dealing with cyber attacks and cyber security. So the thing about it is that these things like ransomware and so on was there before not the advent, but the popularization and the application of AI. So we are seeing AI as contributing to that, but also allowing us to be able to guard against that. And so we need to develop the skill set. We need to develop the knowledge related to AI and other related fields, as fintech and so on, to be able to deal with these threats. It has come into stark focus recently, especially in Trinidad and Tobago, where we have had at least 3 major attacks to significant major institutions, and both the private, public, and you can say statutory NGO type sphere. And so it is something that we need to be mindful of, and we need to find ways and means to up our game very quickly if we are to be able to deal and cope with this. Why? Because the world is somehow seeing us as vulnerable to these type of attacks. And so we seem to be a target, at this stage for some reason. And so we need to get our game up pretty quickly there. But let's look on the other side. How can we use AI as a productivity tool? And these are the areas that we're going to be focusing on, right? So we're going to be looking at automation, predictive analysis, personalization, natural language processing, machine learning, and so on. I'm just putting it to you here, and I wouldn't be able to go through each in very detail given the time that we have. But these are the broad areas that we can use AI as a productive tool. However, there's some caveats to that. One, it is important that we ensure that AI is used ethically and transparently, and that workers are properly trained and then supported in adopting to AI-powered tools and processes. Because when we have disruptions, it will disrupt us in many ways. One of those areas is it will disrupt our job market. And so even more so, we need to be prepared for those type of eventualities. So let's look at some areas where AI is presently used in practice, which will give us some indication of where it can be applied for us. So healthcare is one area that it is heavily used at present, right? From drug discoveries to diagnosing diagnostic images. For instance, the AI is able to look at X-rays and CT scans and so on, and correctly, to a very large extent, when I say very large extent, much more accurate than humans. Things that humans would miss, the AI would pick it up. So that, because once it has learned and it's there, unlike humans, it does not forget. So it would always be looking for that, and it's less likely to be able to miss something because it can process much more data, than we can process. We also see it in personalized medicine. And the next slide, I will speak to an example of that. In finance, we have what is called now is algorithmic trading. More than 60% of trade on the stock market now is done by AI. Some companies has actually relocated close to Wall Street so that they could connect directly to Wall Street, and they can make trades at a speed that humans cannot. because again, the amount of data that is able to process. We also see it in fraud detection and in customer service. So for instance, if you try to buy a plane ticket from any airline abroad, you barely ever speak to a human. If you have a complaint or if you have an issue, you go through a chatbot and virtual assistants. Even so, if you in Amazon, if you look to get assistance, first you go through that before you can actually reach a live person to get support if your query is not answered. For example, and there's just two examples here. Tempus, they use the AI to be able to customize the medication for cancer patients. And this is a situation where because cancer is so diverse in different people, humans aren't able to go through all the different permutations and combinations and so on to get the ideal drug. But the AI could do that in a matter of minutes, what could technically take us years to do. And with cancer patients don't have that time. And so there was a case in Australia where using AI and the patient's data and large data sets, they were able to, sort of personalize the medication for that patient and allow them to survive the cancer. What was interesting was that the doctors had previously overlooked that combination of drug, thinking that it would not have been effective, for that patient. In manufacturing and in transport, you all know about autonomous vehicles that is happening with Google and with Tesla in terms of driverless vehicle. And it is not far-fetched that within a generation or so, that we may not be people may not be required to have a driver's license anymore, given that the AI would be, we would have autonomous vehicles and our mode of transport would completely change, right? So that's the speed at which these things are happening, and we are seeing now. As a matter of fact, some trucking companies are already using and testing driverless trucks across, and of course, cross-country deliveries and so on. So GE, for instance, will use it in their aviation for predictive maintenance. GE is one of the largest producers of plane engines in the world. So predictive maintenance and equipment optimization and stuff is very important, within that context. Let's move along. In retail, inventory management, a lot of the large retailers in the world, they have such large warehouses that humans cannot operate in there. We are talking about warehouses. At IKEA, for instance, they have a warehouse that's 1 kilometer long, that's completely manned by robots because humans wouldn't be able to find anything in there. And they use AI to optimize their inventory levels and so on, so that they will have greater productivity in that regard. So we know that Amazon, for instance, if you just type in and search for something, it gives you recommendation. It'll use it for supply chain optimization, the automation of its warehouse. So too, Walmart and other major users would use this in this regard. Now, to bring this all together, this is an example of using AI that I found yesterday, right? So this is the date, and it's the 1st of February. And those of you who would know of the NFL and football and the importance of player safety. But while it is being used here, we can see the application and this mode of application being relevant in other areas. So what they're actually doing here is that using large data sets. So the NFL in collaboration with AWS. And AWS has been a part of the NFL in analytics for a few years now. But what they are doing is using these data sets to be able to predict and help with players' health, players' safety. They also use it actually to how best to play. But the whole idea is to have the data, and that's a word we'll see coming up all the time, right? The importance of data, because what they actually do is set up cameras and other data capture devices in stadiums, in the sideline, in players' helmet, in players' clothing, and so on. So they are collecting thousands of different data points to put this all together. No, we can see this being applied in a number of different ways in the work environment. Even in the Caribbean, when we speak of things like cricket and other sports, we can see AI and these sort of tools being used to enable more productive ways of doing stuff. In the tourism sector, we see it applicable in the agricultural sector, where you have something called precision farming and so on. So there are a number of ways and means by which AI could be applied. What and where can we use it in SIDS, small island developing states? So one, we could see it as an offense again, as for diversification. Right. This would mean developing the skills, tools, techniques, and the opportunities by which we can make our present industries, agriculture, tourism, services, and so on, much more productive by having more precise data, allowing us to leverage the technology and have greater efficiency in terms of crop production, in customizing our tourism product, in protecting our environment, and so on. We also see it in terms of precision farming and education and workforce development, the need for online tools, the need for online education, and so on. So we can customize things around it. It requires building that capacity. Telemed, we are fortunate here in the Caribbean, right? In the sense that we are well poised and positioned to be able to deal with some of these, what we call offshoring services. So things like telemedicine and back office processing and so on. We are a favored region for that. A major factor for that is because we can speak English. And so, that's an advantage. But again, we have to develop the capacity to do that. At the onset, we spoke about the Caribbean and its, how climate change could affect us. And so collecting the data, just as how we can collect the data for the sports. If we can collect data on climate change and the things that are happening, it would put us in a better position to be able to handle this. And why it's important for us? Because data that's collected from around the world may not necessarily apply to us. So models may not fit our environment. So it is therefore onerous on us to collect that sort of data, which would lead to things like early warning systems and so on. At the same time, we need to be mindful of a number of issues. And this always comes up when we are speaking of AI and its application. Why? Because it is disruptive. It would make current problems worse, and it will create new problems if it is not dealt with. Bear in mind, us not becoming ready doesn't change any of this. It has to, this exists and is part and parcel. So these are not issues that we are dealing with in and of ourselves here in the Caribbean. These are global issues. Things like, technological divide. So the onset we saw about preparedness, for instance, in Jamaica, unless we can bridge that divide and get a lot of people involved, which would mean widespread training and access at all levels in society. Job displacements, again, once you have technology like this, it would lead to some job displacement. Therefore, we must be prepared for that. And one way to do that is to ensure that we properly reskill our people. Data privacy and security always be an issue, and is becoming even more so given the tools that the hackers and so on have using AI. So you might hear of things like deep fakes, where you can precisely mimic someone's language and actions, and you would think is that person, but it's really a deep fake. Ethical consideration, and that is important for us here. So for instance, again, AI works on information that is fed into it. If the data is biased, then it would lead to unfair outcomes. Again, why it is so important for us to collect the data that is representative of us here in the Caribbean. That's why, for instance, in the US, you find that people of color are more likely to be victims of certain diseases and stuff, because the data that's collected is not skewed or doesn't readily pertain to them. So treatment aren't very well structured or targeted to those groups. Infrastructure challenges, again, the readiness for this. and policy and regulatory framework. So it's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things we have to do, and it is happening at such a great speed. We don't have much time, for this. Bear in mind also the implications for AI has called into question, how serious it is and what's the impact for humanity as a whole. In 2011, I'm sure we're all familiar with Stephen Hawking, and he said, unless we learn how to prepare for it and avoid the potential risk, AI could be the worst event in the history of our civilization. In short, he's saying that if AI becomes too human, they could actually replace humans. Just less than a year ago, right, in March 2023, with the advent of GPT-4, more than 1,000 technology leaders, including people like Elon Musk and the guy from Apple and so on, that they were urging that we put a pause on AI development at this stage, unless and until we understand the risk to society and humanity and how that could impact on us. So it's a lot of things that's happening there with AI and the whole fourth industrial revolution on the whole. And so it is imperative for us here in the region to understand that and put it in context. We need to develop the capacity to be able to function in this 21st century reality, this 21st century reality of the fourth industrial revolution, where AI and related items and skill set would become commonplace. It would be, similar to us being able to navigate the internet. So those skills and capacity must become widespread. We need to understand that there would be opportunities, but there would also be challenges, job displacement, and so on. And so we must be prepared for that. We know this is coming, so we can't say, hey, we didn't see this. It's happening, and it's happening now. So therefore, it requires us to do a number of different things. First and foremost, training and education at all levels. And this training and education, each of one of these here could be a presentation in itself, because when we speak training and education, we are speaking about this happening at all different levels, not only at the base level where we understand and could do the basics of it, but at the higher level where we start becoming the creators of content. And so our education system will need to understand that so that we cater for persons at all the different levels in this regard. Infrastructure and infrastructure development, that is critical to ensuring that we help curb what we call the digital divide. And very importantly, that should maybe number one. So I'm put bullets here, I didn't put numbers, right? Because each of this is important in its own set. But data-driven mindset. One of the things we don't do here in the Caribbean is collect data. We are always grasping for data. We are also always reactive. And so we need to put in place, because AI and its related tools is data-driven. If we don't develop that culture, if we don't develop that mindset, if we don't put things in place, then we would not have the feedstock to make the AI effective within our context. How we do that? Collaboration and partnership at all levels of society and beyond the region. And at the same time, it's our responsibility to develop the governance structure and the ethical policies. So we see that it's quite a lot that needs to be done, and it was quite a mouthful to have taken in the last 30 minutes or so. But we could continue discussion now as we go into the Q&A session. So thank you all. I have much more, but I limited to this in terms of the 30 minutes, and so we could continue the discussion. So over to you, Ron.
So thank you so much, Balraj. Very insightful, practical presentation. And I guess this is a point where everyone wants to jump in to continue the discussion. And as moderator, I'll use that privilege to ask the first question.
Sure.
So as you said, in the beginning of the presentation, that what you will be sharing will not just be applicable only to Jamaica, but the wider Caribbean in that context, and specifically for small island developing states. My question, to you is that to what extent, from your own assessment, would you say Jamaica or even the region in a general sense is ready or prepared for embracing AI or the adoption of it into their business operations?
I think we have the willingness, we are aware, but I don't think, one, we are at the point where we are seeing the necessity is not clear cut, which is a dangerous thing. And the thing about it is we are faced and dealing with so much of different issues that we are now treating this like anything as a linear process and that we would reach there, but we are dealing with a disruptive exponential issue. And so I would say we are far off. And when I speak to other persons who is in the, who is in the industry, they are basically saying, hey, this is code red. We are not understanding what is going to hit us in the next 3, 4, 5 years. And I think at all levels in society, especially I would say at the level of government and at a regional, supranational region. So for instance, things like policies and regulations and so on. While that is an issue at a global level, we need to be addressing that, in a meaningful way. We also need to think in terms of how do we leapfrog? How do we get or put us in a position where we can deal with this very fast? Again, would come down to policies, right? So one of the things I have been proposing for the last 2 years in this regard is to get policies in place where we can quickly train people. So in short, incentivize through funding and so on to encourage people to get into that. This is a new area. We still operate in a way where we still see medicine and law and accountancy, and those things are all well and good. But the fact of the matter is that each and all of those areas are now being affected in a real sense with AI. And so we need to get practitioners in these levels. So even when we're talking about medicine, but things like bioinformatics and nanotechnology and drug deliveries and so on is an integral and important part of our, yes, if you look, last time we were seeing that Prime now has telemedicine. So if you have a Prime membership, you could now have an online doctor who will check you out. That is disruptive, right? And as the tools become even more with things like the Aura Ring and the Apple Watch and so on, right? Your practitioner, your physician could be any part of the world because they're getting your data and can treat you. So these are the things that I think we need to be addressing. And we are, to answer the question, we are not close in that regard.
And I mean, in case I missed it or anybody else in the audience, what would you attribute primarily for our lack of readiness,
Well,
despite
again,
the disruptions that we see all around us internationally?
because it's not a clear-cut front burner items. So we are, because if you look at the slide that I had, look at it here. I think this would help me to answer that question. This one, right? Here it is, the world is happening here, but we are still, the front burner items we are dealing with is crime and social issues, concentrated production, low productivity. So we are still dealing with 20th century problems, but we are in a 21st century world. It reminds me of, there's this nice cartoon in marketing that shows two group of persons, two tribes or two persons fighting, and they are fighting with sticks and cutlass and stones and so on. And two guys come with them and say, hey, we have something to sell you, guns. And they're like, can't you see we're busy here fighting a war? We are so caught up in dealing with our, these issues that we are forgetting that the world is moving along. And for that reason, Latin America and the Caribbean, we are falling behind in terms of that level of productivity. We see it happens, all the time with the competitiveness index. We are safe and except maybe Africa, we are right next to them in terms of the level of productivity and competitiveness. And where we score low, innovation and technology and cooperation and so on.
Sure. Thank you for this. We have some questions from our attendees. Mr. Chambers, which I think is based in Jamaica, has asked, that in Jamaica, they often found that, and I guess it's also true for the wider region, we are consumers of technology, right? But not creators or, innovators of technology. And he's
Yes,
asking,
yes.
in that sense, how do you think we can make a shift?
Right. I like that question. I was hoping somebody would have asked that question. And it goes back to, again, policy. 2 years ago, I had made a presentation, a similar one, but with a focus on fintech. In trying to be gone, this was run in a the central bank conference. And one of the recommendation of one of the things we brought up there is that, and the same thing, how do we then become creator of content? And so we have to pick winners in a sense, but we have to incentivize the persons. We have a lot of bright people in the Caribbean, and we have a lot of bright people at the university and so on, right? But we are not challenged. We are not challenged into that area. So one, we have to get the right people in the right spaces. How do we do that? We incentivize persons to say, here what, if you want to study this, you are 100% funded. Now, it goes back also to, we must have a clearly articulated long-term macroeconomic future, where we want to head. What are the people that we need? What are the skills gap? And so we can then focus persons into those areas to say, hey, if you have this, STEM, science and so on, this is an opportunity for you here. So study this. Also, for our existing professionals, retraining. Right. So we have to develop that capacity through collaboration and partnership with, say, the private sector, with the university and so on, that we now become, or we create what we call a distinctive competitive advantage. A good example of that was Japan. And Japan was not the leaders in the semiconductor industry, but they wanted to be. What they did was, firstly, they sent out their students to go out there and learn the tricks of the trade, right? Then they came back to Japan. But very importantly, what they did, they formed alliances between the needs of the industry and what is happening in academia and research. So the research was geared towards semiconductor, but building capacity in a real sense in industry. And today, Japan is one of the leading producers of in the semiconductor industry. So, the model is there. First, we develop the skill set. Secondly, we build a framework and a policy. And thirdly, we infuse it in industry. But it also calls for a mindset change, a culture change, that we see this now, right? And this can apply to anything. There's a reason why we're not good at cricket anymore, because we don't see it as important. It doesn't have the hype. It doesn't have the glamour. And so what we need to do in that sense, to build the glamour around this. And it's not hard to do, because our young people are very much into it. You will be amazed how much they know beyond what. But if we don't provide the avenues for them, then we will stay at that level.
Understood. And we have a question. Someone Fitzgerald Yaw. He wants to know your thoughts, where some people talk about us already being in a fifth industrial revolution with the mainstreaming of AI. What is your response to that perception?
Well, again, it's terminologies, right? So if you look at it here, and I put this, different people would put it in different contexts or different ways. Forget the terminology, forget, what happened, or what we have to look at is this at the real level where we are. So in terms of AI, we are in the stage of what we call generative AI, which means that we feed the AI the information into the model, and it will create new knowledge, right? So this is now all coming together with things as quantum technology and cyber security and the application there. So, it doesn't matter if we call it fifth or sixth, because some will say we're in sixth generation in communication, fifth generation, the fifth industrial revolution, and so on. But what is important is the level of development at the cutting edge, right? In that sense, what is really important is where we are at. Again, goes back. Are we generating this? How is the users? How are we incorporating this into our everyday living and industry?
I mean, and again, you know, the relevance of the topic for all regional economies is underscored because we have someone from Guyana, Martin Messiah, and he's asking, you know, based on his own Guyana's experience, he's also interested in finding out your opinion on how should we explore the relationship between intellectual property and artificial intelligence, since it has many practical applications, including cultural products like music, film, and other areas, as you know, that we are actually good in the Caribbean of creating. You know, so
Yes.
what is the
Yes.
interplay
Yes.
between
Yes. Yes.
AI
And
and
intellectual property.
intellectual
Yeah,
property?
yeah. And it's more than just AI. It's a cultural thing here for us in the Caribbean. Again, part of the mindset, that we need to develop. Why is that important? Because if we are talking about becoming the generators of knowledge, then we have to be able to have property rights protection. It is well known that the part of the engine for growth is entrepreneurship and innovation, but we need to have property rights protection, and that's where intellectual property comes in. So persons need to, and I would extend that, persons need to, one, know that they can monetize their invention, their music, and so on. And so again, it calls for policy, it calls for a mindset, but more than that, right? And I would even extend it beyond just intellectual property. Crime and safety and so on in the same context, right? What is keeping us back in that? Take, for instance, if we have an innovator who develops a great product and has monetized that, he becomes a target in society, right? And so it's not just protecting our intellectual property, but also protecting the holders and the brain power who is generating such intellectual property. So we got to use the artificial intelligence, to help to create that sort of an environment. And again, this is somebody from Guyana who is raising that issue. We are seeing that Jamaica has that issue. We know crime and so on is a big issue in Trinidad and Tobago. So therefore, these are issues that transcends the region, and so we don't have to go solve it all on our own. That's where somebody is asking about the approach to CARICOM. What's what would it make sense to approach this issue from a CARICOM context? Very much so. Why? And that would lead to uniformity in terms of policies across the region. That would lead to greater, what you can say, economies of scale, and as we massify. That would lead to a reduction of the digital divide across the region, and that sharing and so on can help can help to bring us together. So I very much endorse that. We need to approach this at the level of CARICOM, at a regional level. Because by ourselves, each country in itself, we can barely have a cricket team to develop AI at this level, because the knowledge gap across the region is very large in some areas. So if we go it together, we can help to to stop that, and we can see the application across the region.
Okay. I mean, there's a question from Jamaica, in terms of the prospects of what type of jobs in the next 3 to 5 years, maybe, will be available as a result of the incorporation of or adoption of AI.
Yeah.
But this is just about speculation, because if the state of readiness is so low, I mean, the next 3 to 5 years may still be a big challenge, right?
But it also brings some risk. And let me tell you what is the risk it brings, right? Because at an individual level, persons are educating themselves.
Right.
Right. But guess what is happening? Because there are a lot of vacancies, because this is a skill globally is required. A lot of people who are trained in that area would now pick up jobs elsewhere.
That's right.
So when I was doing the research for fintech,
capacity issue for us in terms of
yes, it's a big it's an issue.
losing.
So with our readiness, it could be a drain for us, and that because people would leave. I mean, I know of a few people. Actually, there was one guy who used to work at us at the Lockjack. And he did the business analytics course that we were offering, right? And he started, and now he's in Canada. And I know of a number of persons. Some companies will actually offer sign-on bonuses for persons to work. And bear in mind that because of the nature of the industry, you could be any part of the world and be doing this. So who upskilling themselves is getting jobs. And so we need to now massify that, you know. I know of an instance where a foreign company, an Indian company, offered to come here and set up shop. And they asked, hey, we need 3,000 people trained in fintech. And we found 3. Right.
Out of 3,000,
Yes, and we found the 3. And two out of that 3 was headhunting. You know, so there is the need to develop that capacity. It would also lead to a situation where we have a lot of educated people who can't find jobs, right? So again, it goes back to incentivizing persons to get in that. You're now seeing the university and so on responding in that sense with some of the newer degrees and so on that they now have.
I mean, and that brings us to the whole issue of individuals basically investing independently and training up themselves in this area. And it takes us to the classroom because we are, a teaching or educational institution. Someone, which is Deborah Ann Davidson, has asked, even in the humanities, in the classroom, how can she start adopting or incorporating AI as a teaching tool or a learning tool, which then could actually be transferred into the workplace ultimately?
It's really interesting, but just this morning, I was going through some website or so, right? And an advertisement came up, and the advertisement was a program that allows you to capture information from ChatGPT to make books.
Okay.
Yeah, what I say, right?
Yes.
To be able to create, so you creating PDF books. And part of that, what they were saying here, using the AI, it could write stories for you, right? So we're now seeing like movie scripts and music and literature and so on. AI is being used to help generate ideas, because one of the things one of they decided was actually selling it as, get rid of writer's block. AI would provide some of the ideas. No, it is saying that, hey, it would provide me with the ideas, but I have to develop it. So in this regards, the humanities and and so on, it is a tool. We now see, for instance, that we have books that would like Audible. It would read for you. Let me put it that way, like Audible books and so on. So the technology and its application is cross-cutting. And so in one sense, it could actually be a threat to some of these areas, like say script writing and music and to some extent and so on. So you have to be able to adopt and adapt the tool as a defensive mechanism, but you could also use it to your advantage. Then the way we teach, right? AI could create teaching tools and so on that you don't have to keep doing it over and over, but the mechanism, some of the routine tasks and so on, that it would allow you to now spend your time doing the more value added. How much time, as teachers, we say, we don't have the time in the classroom to do certain value added things. AI would allow us to do that in all different areas.
So someone has an interesting question. It's Renato Hassanati, actually. He wanted to know, how do you see the impact of AI on the development of digital currency?
And that's what that was the part that was going to get to in when I spoke about the CARICOM part of it right now. So bear in mind, AI is a tool in that regard. Digital currency would fall under the area of what we call fintech or financial technologies. I might be naive, I'm saying that in this area in terms of this, I don't see no reason why we in the Caribbean cannot develop a digital currency. or have a digital currency for the region. Because here in mind, part of the problem we face with foreign currency scarcity in the Caribbean is because if I'm going to Grenada or Barbados or Jamaica or St. Lucia, I have to have US dollars, right? Because that's become the common currency. So a lot of time the demand is not necessarily for purchase outside of the region, but for purchase within the region. Now, if we have a common currency that that is accepted and used, in the Caribbean, then that would have to take away some of that demand. So, I think that part of it is with everything else in CARICOM, because we can't have unity. But I think we should really be thinking and looking into that direction. It may not happen overnight, but if we start the process and look into it, there might be trials and errors, and it have a lot of smoothing out to do and so on. But that is something I would say should be a front burner item from a region. I know they speak of all the different risks and so on. A lot of that, to be honest with you, has to do with the present situation and the present structure where the incumbents would suffer as a result. So it's like, let me put it this way. It's like the internal combustion engine versus electric cars, right? The incumbent want to ensure that it stays, right? A digital currency is no different. I ain't saying it's the perfect world, it's the perfect time for it, but it's something that we should be looking into.
Certainly. I mean, you have one response to, I think, the point that you made, where persons in the region, and you may have known some of them, who would have equipped themselves in this area of the fourth industrial revolution with specific focus on AI or business data intelligence as well, working for companies even remotely. And Gerald was saying that is it not a fact though that the globalization of AI means that Caribbean folks with the right skills can work for global customers from right here in the region,
Very much so.
and that's the fact.
Very
You
much
also
so.
have Patrick Newman, who, as if from Jamaica as well, is a degree in AI from a university in Jamaica is worthwhile, And to answer that quickly, from my view, is that it's an investment that will pay off in the future, because if you're only looking at the local context of Jamaica, then the opportunities may be limited for now. But if you look at the global space as your employer, the possibilities are much more higher, and therefore the relevance to the global space is high. But what is your opinion in terms of
Right. And in terms of that, and even if he's looking at it, would it make sense, would people recognize a degree from Jamaica and so on, right? What I have seen and what I've noticed is that companies don't pay paramount importance to the designation where it is, but what you can do.
competence, the technical
They
competence?
look for the technical. It doesn't matter where we get it from. Once we develop that technical, what they will see is, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And then a lot of them have a lot of, very intensive program where they actually train you and get you, up to that. And even though now we do these degrees, and so it basically puts us in a platform that we can now go on to do the others and get those certifications. So for instance, I see people who would have masters in data science and so on, right? But they then go and do the AWS course, or they would do the Google Analytics and so on, and they get that sort of accreditation and customization and so on that is required. So this is one area where in the Caribbean we like to look to see the designation that you have a degree in this. This is one area that's competency based. Once you develop that skill set, it is cross-cutting and at a global level.
Right. So, when you're presenting, you referred to certain sectors where you have seen widespread adoption of AI, like the offshoring services, the telemedicine, even in climate change, right?
Right.
So we have Govindra Raghubansi that speaks about the energy sector specifically. And we have three major, let's say, economies in the region that is energy dependent: Trinidad, now Guyana, and Suriname. And the question from Govindra is basically, how can AI affect the energy industry and what opportunities or threats are there,
Right.
from your opinion?
So the honest truth on that is that the AI would allow us to be able to divest away from those traditional sectors. The fact of the matter, and we know it, is that the fossil fuel sector, we have a limited span in, in that area. And so that is what I would say in that regard is do what we are doing in that regard as we do it, because to a large extent, the technology that we use in those sectors are imported anyway. So they incorporate the latest technology and so on. But what I think is important for us in the region, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and Suriname specifically, right, is to use the windfall and use the revenues to help us to build that capacity so that when oil and gas is no longer the in thing, we have something at a high level, and I said at a high level, at a value added level that we can fall back on. A classic example of that is what has happened, what we saw happen with Suriname when Alcoa pulled out 6 years ago. The economy just literally fell. And so the same thing could happen to us if oil is no longer viable, right? We don't want, that would be a greater shock than AI could bring to us. So it is important for us, right? And this is something I'm going to tell you, we have been interrogating and we've been looking at for more than 10, 15 years now. And, in terms of what is happening to you, I can remember being in a meeting at a high level. And the reason it was an international agency had asked us, to speak about that is that, hey, we are seeing oil and gas, which your economy is based on, has a limited life. What are you doing to diversify? Why is this thing taking so long? And now the opportunities are there. So I think it is paramount. And again, at a regional level, for us to prepare for that time. Many futurists say that by 2030, that alternative energy would be so cheap, it would make everything else look 20th century. So we got to prepare for when that happens. 2030 is not far off.
So by extension, the flip to it is that even, let's say, a country like Guyana, which is now, beginning to really being able to unleash. The
Right.
AI could be used maybe in, for example, how they will be able to plan their transition eventually.
Right. Infrastructure
And
development.
what are the aspects of the economy or the society that you can channel the best use of those resources generated now in the short term, So I guess it's
again, the model is there for that. Norway, right? Granted, Norway was somewhat of a developed country at the point when they found oil in 1971. But what they did was basically use the windfall from that one. And this is something we in the Caribbean has, not done, and I hope Guyana would do that, is to seriously develop a well sovereign fund, right? Using the windfall from that. And they now use the resources from that to develop other areas, right? Because what we have seen and what we know is that there's something we call the resource curse, right? Where we live beyond our means, in the sense that we use the richness from the extractive sector, but we don't see it propelling development. And that is where, for instance, the AI and, getting into those spaces, right? And if using the wealth, using the money in this regard to develop that capacity becomes important.
But do you also, from your knowledge of the region, or even with Jamaica, are there specific sectors that you think would be ripe, even though the attitude at the top or policy may not be there, but they're more or less in the different, let's say, options of AI that could be applied?
Right.
Are there sectors that you think can be easily candidates for implementing AI?
Right. So we could look at that in two ways: enhancement and new development.
Right.
Take, for instance, our existing industries, tourism, agriculture, mining, those traditional sectors. AI could be applied in a real sense to develop and take those industries to a higher level. So how we take, for instance, tourism. Tourism is an experience. Therefore, we need to know where our tourists is coming from. We need to know them better, and we need to understand how they make decisions. AI could allow us to do that. It can help us to personalize the service that we offer. It can help us to understand what the customer is looking for, so we can better target our market. So it could enhance the use and the application. It could enhance the existing industries that we have. In the same way, we could apply it to agriculture. So there are new modern ways and technology, for instance, in farming. For instance, precision agriculture, hydroponics, the use of, say, container farming and all these kind of, because one of the things that we don't have land, right? So if we can use that space more intensively to be able to develop new industries. So take, for instance, and we see Colombia use that to a very large extent. The horticulture section. We think of agriculture only food production, but there's a big industry for flowers and exotic tropical flowers and so on, right? AI could help us to develop, and I said not just help us, but could be applied, because the technology is there already, to develop a uniform product. So technically, each flower would look specifically uniform, because it is fed in a certain way. And we understand the science behind that, and it's grown in a controlled environment and so on. And that is money that we can earn, because we have the natural environment to do that. We have the climate to develop and grow some of those things, and there's market for that. So there's enhancement. But I also think we could now develop new areas. Telemedicine, for instance. We have a lot of doctors that are unemployed, a lot of doctors who work on a month contract and so on, right? We are developing these people. We can develop telemedicine. We can develop remote access medical practices. Just as a back office processing, we can have front office medical practitioners. I do think it's far-fetched for us to develop, say, a pharmaceutical industry here, because we have the human capital. We can procure some of those technologies and so on. And these are areas that would give us independence, for instance, but it would always also give us an area to diversify. We are not a large population, right? So therefore, we need our people to be trained at a level where they add the most value, right? And we could have robots clean the road and dig drain and do those sort of things. But our people is at a level where they are able to compete at the highest level. And that's the vision, that's the mindset I think we need to develop.
And of course, it underscores the point that despite the extent to which you adopt AI, you always need the human resource element for it to work, effectively.
Yes.
The final question, before I ask you for your final thoughts, is sometimes you speak about AI and people think significant investments, okay? But could you just disaggregate, for example, the types of AI or the incremental aspects that you can consider as an approach? Right. Because some people don't need a small business, for example, may have very simple AI-related technology that can be used to enhance payroll, for example, so.
Exactly, yeah. So as I say, it's incremental. So also what we see happening now is you have companies, take for instance the example that I use with the software that can take information for ChatGPT and create documents and create books. That's an easy off-the-shelf application that we can use there. Small business in terms of their managerial function, in terms of their accounting function, in terms of advice, in terms of understanding their customers and so on. These are easily available options that can help to enhance business service. Now, that would put us in the application side. The more evasive and would require more investment is in the creation side. But again, right, you can do that at a micro level and massify it, right? We have people who here there are companies here that would do animation for some of the largest studios in the world. right, outsourced to them right here in Trinidad and Tobago. That would be doing work for Disney and Pixar and Nickelodeons and a whole, we look at it in television and we don't know that come from right here. So the base level, the technology and the skill set to some extent is there already. But when we look now, we will start seeing, and maybe what you can do is, look at your own area and easy research, what are some of the applications that you can use and put into practice that would help to enhance the service that you do. I mean, take for instance in teaching, we use the AI to enhance some of the things that we do, to get the ideas, to put things together, to see what is the new research, and and so on and so on. You still have to rely on your knowledge because ChatGPT is not 100% correct. It can't do mathematics good and so on, but you can use the tools in that regard. You can use it to say, hey, what is the best way I should approach the delivery of this topic, or to do this. So you can use the tool to enhance what you do at a very micro level.
And Dr. Kistow, thanks so much for your presentation. I mean, the insights and what we can live here, as some of the lessons to take with us. Definitely AI, once leveraged appropriately, has profound impact and can provide very great benefits in terms of productivity, improving efficiency, and ultimately our competitiveness. It also underscores the point that you need to be ready. It's a mindset that needs to change. The opportunity has to be recognized. You need a policy level type of framework to guide and incentivize, as you say, persons to embrace it over time. At the same time, simultaneously, that persons or individuals, especially the younger generations, have recognized that and have not waited for anyone, but proceeded to upskill themselves in those areas. So we look forward to continued research in this area. And we also would like to be able to provide guidance to companies how they may be able to consider adopting incrementally solutions and applications related to AI to enhance their own efficiencies and operations. So thank you very much for your time. To the audience, on behalf of the LockJack GSB, we thank you as well for joining us today. We are very happy to have a very regional representation here, even though our special focus today would have been, in a sense, Jamaica. So we look forward to, again, you joining us in the near future. You will see the relevant information being provided for when our next webinar will be. So good afternoon to everyone, and special thanks again to you, Dr. Kistow. Have a pleasant afternoon.
It's my pleasure.